Cinema Bytes on CCP TV, the Emmy Award-winning educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lewis. I'm an associate professor of English who teaches film studies here at the college. Cinema Bytes reviews issues and topics within classic and contemporary films. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're having to do things a little bit differently here, so we're recording from our homes, brought to you by the magic of technology. In today's episode, we're going to interview Rafael Logrono. Rafael is a bilingual journalist, writer, and college instructor based here in Philadelphia. He writes and teaches about Latinx communities, race, and media. He teaches a variety of courses across several colleges, including Latin American media, immigration and the American dream, public speaking, and college writing. He's a frequent co-host on the Spanish-language radio program Dos Puntos on 106.5 WPPM and Filatinos Radio. His writing and commentary have appeared in Latino Rebels, Truth Out, and Radio France Internationale. Welcome, Rafael.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. Gracias por la invitación. I threw a little bit of Spanish in there for you.
All right. Well, I will not make you suffer through my Spanish and respond in kind, but thank you for being here, and we really look forward to our conversation. So today's episode is part of a series that Rafael and I will do on Latinx film and issues of representation of Latinx people in film. And today's episode, we're going to look at how Latinx immigrants are represented in film. So, Rafael, what do you think is the immigrant representation that comes to mind for most Americans?
There's one stereotypical representation that we often see in media. That's the working class, brown, Mexican, undocumented immigrant. And Latinx immigration is so important for us to analyze and critically consume, especially in media. There are a lot of misconceptions around what it means to be Latinx, right? And when we often hear about Latinx communities and Latinx individuals, we often think about immigration. Even though, the Latinx experience in the U.S. is very much connected to immigration, there are a lot of Latinos out there who have no connection to the immigrant experience. So I think that that's part of the conversation that we should also be having, right? Yes, there's a significant portion of Latinos who are connected to the Mexican experience, and then there are a lot of Latinos who are not connected to the Mexican experience. And going back to that stereotype of the brown Mexican undocumented immigrant who's working class, even though that's a stereotype, that is very common among Latinx communities. 63% of all Latinos here in the U.S. identify as Mexican. And there are about 19 or 20 other Latin American countries that we consider Latin American, right? And that big chunk, 63%, is all Mexican. So it's important for us to take a look at this stereotype. And that's the one that we're going to kind of focus on today on Cinema Bytes.
Good. Now, do you have a film in mind that really kind of hones in on this experience?
Yeah, so I think Under the Same Moon, excuse me. I was thinking about the opposite. Under the Same Moon came out in 2007. It's a great clip to start with because it shows us this very common trope of the undocumented immigrant. We see clips of border crossing. We see the common trope of family separation. It kind of reinforces the idea of what a quote-unquote undocumented immigrant is supposed to do and be like, right? Crossing the border. So I think it's good to watch a clip and then we can come back and talk about it.
Great. Okay, so let's roll that clip and then we'll discuss it afterwards.
¿Los tres van a cruzar?
Ya Dios nos puso en este camino.
A las 11 sale una troca para allá, ¿eh?
Hoy en la noche.
¿Algún problema?
No, ninguno. Es que no pensábamos que fuera tan pronto. ¿Quién maneja?
¿Qué carajos te importa? Mira, mi rey. Aquí no hay más que de dos sopas. O se trepan a la troca, o se pasan nadando a ver si llegan, güeyes. Órale.
Buenos días. Are you Carmen?
Doña Carmen, que mi trabajo me ha costado, ¿eh?
My brother and I, we are legal U.S. citizens de los Estados Unidos. Do you speak English?
Yes.
Can you tell her that we can take babies across?
Que se abren cruzadas.
Ya entendí. Que se vayan al carajo, hombre.
Sorry, no business.
No, wait, did you tell her? Did she understand?
Que si entendimos. Mure chicano ni siquiera saben hablar su propio idioma.
What is she saying? What did she just say?
You better leave.
Did she understand?
Yes.
But did you understand what I said?
Marta, let's just go talk to that coyote that your friend told us
David,
about.
wait. Senora, I'm offering to help you.
Please.
Let's go.
You better leave.
Let's go.
Please.
Come on, sis.
Okay, but if she changes her mind, will you just call me here? I'm leaving my card with him. Just call me, just tell her.
I told you.
Well, you weren't much help.
What do you expect me to do?
Se creen mejor que uno nada más porque nacieron del otro lado, ¿verdad?
¿Ya has usado chicanos para cruzar bebés con sus mamás?
Bueno, conocidos, no extraños. Además están muy verdes los mangos, mijito. Y con esa cara de susto que tienen estos güeyes, no, hombre, de volada les cae la migra.
All right, so Rafael, break down what we just saw there.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this clip and this film sort of reinforces this idea of what undocumented immigrants are like in the U.S. and how they arrive to this country. It's often a misconception, right, that all undocumented immigrants arrive from the southernmost border with Mexico here in the U.S. However, most undocumented immigrants are undocumented because they've overstayed their visas. So they were allowed to be in the U.S. initially at their first arrival. And this film specifically, I kind of like the timing of when it was released, because it was released in 2007. This was a year after the big pro-immigration protests in 2006. I remember being like a 12, 13, 14-year-old down in Center City with my mom and my undocumented aunt and protesting with them, right? Protesting for immigrant rights, protesting for the U.S. government to continue classifying undocumented immigration as a misdemeanor rather than a felony. And this was a perfect timing, right? Because it sort of continued that conversation. And it's a conversation that we are still having today. And in this clip, too, I think we see a lot of the generational differences of the first wave of immigrants, right, and the second generation of immigrants. With the clip of that lady who's a legend in Mexico, Carmen Salinas, I often describe her as like the Meryl Streep with some sass of Mexico. Where she says, those darn Chicanos can't even speak their own language. And we see that tension here in the US, right? The first generation immigrants, the second generation immigrants, where there's often that disconnect and that connection to the native cultures that sort of brought those individuals and those families to the US. So I think this first film is a great conversation starter. And it's a great way for people to be introduced to the undocumented immigrant representation in Hollywood and in film.
Right. And for the record, I remember being much older than 12 or 13 in 2007. And I was also interested to see America Ferrera in that clip as well, because I think now she is a big star in the U.S., but I think a lot of us know her from lighter fare like Ugly Betty and Superstore. So it's interesting to see her in something a little more serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interestingly, she's become one of those faces of the Latinx community and of the undocumented immigrant community, even though she's not undocumented herself. She's become one of those celebrity faces of advocacy for pro-immigrant changes here in the U.S. So it's interesting to look back at how sort of she initiated her career here in the U.S. and who she is now, right? This mega well-known activist. We saw her take a pivotal role in the 2020 elections. We saw her trying to get out the votes, right? Trying to motivate fellow Latinas to come out and vote in the 2020 elections. So it's interesting to see that change, right? Her in 2007 in this film, and then her now, being this mega activist. Sort of her journey has come full circle.
Yeah, and for our viewers at home, if you're interested in learning more about her journey, she did a wonderful TED Talk. I highly recommend that you look up and watch. Now, carrying on with our discussion of undocumented immigrants, because it has been such a big topic of conversation in recent years, for better or for worse, the next film you want to discuss explores that experience in a brutally honest way. So tell us a little bit more about this film.
Yeah, I think El Norte is a great way for non-immigrants and non-Latinx individuals to sort of familiarize themselves with a lot of the struggles that immigrants face in native countries. And this reminds me of an immigration theory that a lot of scholars critically analyze and use to understand the immigrant experience. Push and pull, right? So the things that push you out of a specific country. So it can be war, it can be other forms of civil unrest, political unrest. It can be a hurricane, right? We saw that with Hurricane Maria and a lot of Puerto Ricans who arrived to mainland United States. And then the pull factors, right? The reasons why you're getting pulled to a specific country, a better education system, better healthcare, more job opportunities. And I think this film, El Norte, does a great job of seeing some of the struggles that a lot of immigrants face in their native country, and some of the reasons why I think we as Americans should be more welcoming to immigrants.
Great. Well, let's, before we talk about the film more, let's look at the trailer for the film so we can kind of get a better sense of it, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it a little further.
United by family. Torn by injustice. Inspired by a dream.
Al norte.
El norte.
They traveled thousands of miles to get to a new land. But their journey was just beginning. More than a decade after its original theatrical release, the dream still lives in a land called El Norte.
Okay, so Rafael, tell us a little bit more about El Norte now that the audience is kind of a little bit oriented to it better.
Yes, so El Norte follows two siblings who are forced to flee Guatemala. Who are forced to leave Guatemala because it's no longer a healthy, safe place for them. For those who don't know too much about Latin American history, Guatemala went through a very terrible, very deadly civil war that took up most of the second half of the 20th century. And a lot of times, we don't often talk about our involvement in all of these issues in Latin America, our involvement, us here in the United States. And one of the things that I'm kind of critical about this film, right, and you don't really see that too much in the trailer either, is that we don't show the U.S. involvement in a lot of these things that happen in Latin America. We oftentimes tend to be one of the reasons why so many people want to come to the United States, right? Sort of like a full circle moment. We're the reason why, and then they arrive to our country, right? The U.S. involvement in this civil war is widespread, right? First, in 1954, the U.S. tried it succeeded, right, at a coup, right, supported a specific individual to lead a coup in Guatemala. The U.S. trained individuals in this war to be part of this war, this very deadly war. And we see that in the film, right? It's not a safe place for a lot of people. And we see people trying to come to El Norte, the north, which is a common term used throughout Mexico and Central America, sort of that aspiration, right? Our goal is to go to El Norte to fulfill that American dream. Now, let me tell you, while this film happened in 1983, almost 40 years ago, these issues are still pervasive throughout Latin America. These issues of poverty, of gun violence, of gang activity are just very pervasive and very common, especially in the poor areas of Latin America. So connecting it to how I introduced the film, I wish we, as individuals here in the U.S., we're more aware of the push and pull factors, right? The reasons why a lot of people need to escape for a better life from their home countries.
Great, thank you. And I think you bring up a good point with that because, you know, as you mentioned, a lot of times we are, I would say, not only unaware, but just straight up oblivious to the US's role in a lot of the unrest that is happening in the countries that is driving people to come to the US. And I think also for some people, especially recently, there's been this kind of misconception that once people cross the border, they sort of live off the fat of the land in America. And I think this film and our next film really kind of show that that's not always the case. In fact, perhaps that's often not the case, and that the struggle continues even after crossing the border. So as we're continuing on with these brutally honest films, our next film tells a really harrowing tale. So what are your thoughts on Entrenos?
Yeah, Entrenos is a film that I think does some justice to the immigrant experience in the U.S. Something we don't often talk about here in the U.S. is the mental toll that undocumented immigration takes on families. Because we know that a lot of Latin American cultures, there's this value of family, right? Where it's not about you as an individual. It's a collectivist society a lot of times, where it's the family's well-being that you prioritize rather than your own well-being. And that often means that certain individuals and families have to flee their home country to go to the U.S. to find job opportunities, to be able to give a better life to their family back home. And in Entrenos, we see that, right? We sort of see the second half of that story, how the family reunifies. We see this Colombian family, right, where the father goes to the U.S. to find work, to find employment opportunities, to be able to provide a better life for his family in Colombia. And in this film, we see the family reuniting in New York. And I think it's a good time to watch the film before we continue talking.
Great. So we're going to watch a clip, and then after that, you'll tell us what's happening in that clip and how it connects to the ideas that we were just discussing. So here's a clip from Entrenos.
What?
Your husband hasn't paid in months.
What?
Dice que no nos pagaron 3
Pero
meses.
3 months.
No, dile que yo pago, que yo solo debo un mes. Uno. Julio.
She says she only owed July.
You're not gonna pay. Get out now.
I pay. I tengo trabajo. Yo estoy trabajando. Mira. Yo tengo plata. Mira, acá.
Not enough.
Yo pago. Mira, I work.
Yes.
Mira. Toma.
Right.
Toma.
You give me 3 months.
No.
Not 1 month. You don't pay now, I call police.
Señor, por
You're
favor,
not gonna pay. Get
no,
out
no
now.
llame a la policía. Simplemente déjame entrar a mi casa. No,
I don't know what you're saying.
Vamos, corre. Ay, corre, por allá, por acá. Corre, mi amor, corre. Andrea está ganando. No. Sí. No, mi amor, ni modo. Ni modo. ¿Qué puedes? Andrea, estás ganando. Sí. ¿Qué? Dele más duro, Gaby. Dele. Pues pucha, cuidado.
So in this, we're seeing a family that's separated here in the U.S., right? We saw the stereotype that you and I have spoken about before, the deadbeat father who is no longer in the picture, right? We see the deadbeat father who is no longer in the picture, who has left the mother and the two children to fend for themselves. And we also see some of the struggles that undocumented immigrants face, right? Sometimes they're not able to pay their bills. Sometimes they have to take some really, really uncomfortable and crappy jobs, right? Crappy jobs to be able to afford their life and to be able to live a life here in the U.S. But also, I kind of like this clip because we started the conversation today talking about the Mexican representation, right? How a lot of this representation tends to focus on Mexico, tends to focus on Central America. But we're seeing here, Colombian families, South America, right? So I like seeing that representation because we know undocumented immigrants come from all over the place in Latin America. And we also know that media tends to not represent a lot of the diversity within Latin American countries. So when I often think about immigrants from Latin America, I think about Cubans, right? Who experience a significantly different immigration experience than most Latinos, right? The U.S.'s relationship with Cuba has really influenced the experience of Cuban immigrants in the U.S. I often think about South Americans, right, who tend to be very different to the Central American and Mexican immigrants. South Americans tend to have a higher income here in this country, tend to be of a higher class, of sort of a middle class in this country, and that's quite a contrast from the working class that comes from Mexico and Central America. So this sort of gets me into the mood of demanding more diversity of Latinx immigrant experiences, and I think it's a good conversation starter because we're seeing for the first time in a long time immigrants that aren't coming from Mexico and Central America, immigrants that are coming from Colombia.
Great. Yeah, and you bring up the diverse Latinx experience, and this is something that has recently become a big conversation, generally tied to politics, because for so long there's been this talk of, politicians have to connect to the Latinx community as though the Latinx community would mean just one thing. But as you pointed out, Cubans are very different from Mexicans, who are very different from South Americans. And so that's actually, been a really interesting thing to see shake out because some politicians really succeeded with the Cuban community, but they failed with the Mexican community and the South American community. So it's been really, I think, enlightening, and hopefully it will broaden the conversation about what the Latinx immigrant and the Latinx community actually means. And on that vein, since we've been talking about, politics, I think one of the big political conversations that has been unfortunately coming to the forefront in recent years is the idea of Latinx immigrants turning to gangs. And our next film really sort of delves into that world, and I'm curious what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I think this film is a good example of the emergence and popularity of narco-related media. It's even become a scholarly genre that a lot of scholars and researchers look into. It's films, movies, TV shows, series, all sort of content that revolves around gang activity. And this, unfortunately, is one of the common depictions of immigrants, right? Including in media and politics, as you mentioned, gang activity. So let's watch a clip and then we come back for a conversation.
Okay, so we're going to watch a clip from Sin Nombre, and when we come back, we'll discuss it a little bit more.
Bienvenido al Destroyer.
What's homie?
Tranquilo, carnal.
¿Qué onda, perro Casper?
¿Qué onda?
Se quebró chavala.
Estos son el Pícaro y el Smoking. Acaban de llegar. Van y vienen para ver cómo están los pedos de las clitas. Son guanacos. ¿Traes sed?
Este es mi barrio, mi hermano. Aquí en los guapos lo miran como saco. Date manso, que no respeta el rayo y te quitando. Date manso, que no respeta el rayo y te quitando. Oye. me quita los tenis, dame los cuartos y toda la vaina y...
Este es mi boy, le dicen el pepino. Y él es el peluquín. No se puede sentar porque le sangra la cola. Tiene hemorroides.
La unidad democrática supone medios encaminados a constreñir a las minorías e impedirles que puedan
te lo tienes que ganar.
mayorías.
Por los momentos comparte. Porque lo que es de la Mara, para la Mara.
Rechaza actitudes,
la mecha
condena a otros y invocan el derecho a la intolerancia. Cuando no se tolera, se abona el campo
sol sí
de
le
la
das color.
fratricida intolerancia absoluta de
Él es la segunda palabra.
Mira mi chucho.
La macha truazal.
La macha truazal. ¿Cómo le fue? ¿Fueron a la bombilla?
Simón. Pero no encontramos ni verga.
Dale.
All right, so Rafael, enlighten us. What is taking place in this, and how does it connect to what you see happening in Latinx representation?
Yeah, so we're seeing this train, right? This train that's very well known to a lot of immigrant communities and very foreign to a lot of people here in the U.S. There are several trains that go across Central America, Mexico, and the U.S. that a lot of immigrants get on, risk their lives getting on to arrive to the U.S. And oftentimes, these trains are packed with individuals, right? They are packed with people. It's extremely, extremely dangerous, right? Because these trains are going very fast. It's a lot of people. There's very little safety protocol, right? And in this film, we're seeing gang members, which is very common, right? Gang members try to steal from these people who are migrating from the region, trying to get their money, trying to take things from them, right? We see this a lot, right? We see this in these trains. This is something that we don't talk about too much, how people risk their lives to arrive to the U.S. And again, those push and pull factors that I love to bring up when we're talking about immigrants, especially in Hollywood, right? The way they are represented. We don't talk about the risks that these individuals take for a better life. And this film, unfortunately, does a good job at representing this, showing this train that's often very dangerous for people to arrive to the U.S.
Great. Well, I think I want to shift gears a little bit because up to this point, we've been talking about films that really focus on the stories of the immigrants who themselves crossed the border. But, as we know, the immigrant story extends far beyond that of just the individual who crossed the border. And it extends to their children and the experience their children have with the sort of role of being a part of an immigrant family, but perhaps themselves not immigrants. So let's talk about this a little bit more. What is our next film?
Yeah, we're going to be watching Mi Familia, My Family. And this film promotes a lot of family values that a lot of non-Latinx people think exist in Latinx communities. Yes, if we look at Latin America and if we start comparing cultural theories, comparing cultures in Latin America and in the U.S., yes, we do see more of a collectivist society, right? Where you think about the greater good rather than individualistic pursuits. However, we often know that this is simplified, right? Things are more complex than just throwing this specific label on this culture and throwing this other label at this other culture. And I think this film is a good example of what a lot of politicians, media, marketers, advertisers sort of trying to paint Latinos to be like, right? And I think folks are going to see that in this clip.
All right, great. So let's watch a little bit of Mi Familia, and then we will come back and talk about it.
I remember my family. My father and my mother. My sister Tony. My brothers Chucho and little Jimmy. Mama! My mother, she believed we all left something behind. She believed the piece of our spirit stayed behind and lived in all the empty chairs.
Francis Ford Coppola and New Line Cinema present the story of one American family and their epic journey through life.
I'm going to be a nun.
A nun?
A nun?
This girl says that you're her husband. Is that true?
You think for 1 minute I want to spend all day pulling up weeds and mowing lawns? You got another thing coming.
Sometimes you don't get things back. When they go away forever.
I'm married. I left my order. And he left his order too.
He left his order?
He was a priest.
I go around this big city, but I'm alone. No one knows me.
I know you, Isabel.
God has been good to us. We've been very lucky. And our life, it has been very, very good.
My Family. Directed by Gregory Nava.
All right, so Rafael, what did we just see?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of family, right? We're seeing a lot of family, this really tight-knit family, this collectivist orientation that I've been talking about, where you give priority to the group's desire rather than your own desires. We also see a lot of social class representations, right? We see people who are very well aware of their social class, and Latinos in general, right? The way we study Latinos and look at Latinos in this country are very well aware of their social class. And we also see this connection to God, right? This very common representation that Latinos are the holiest of them all, right? We're the most Catholic individuals in the world. We see people believing that God controls their destiny. We see people believing in this supernatural thing, right? That God controls absolutely everything in the world. So I love showing this film because we get to see a lot of what people think Latinx immigrant communities are like, right? And even though this representation is very common among many Latinx immigrants, it can be quite the opposite for a lot of people, right? Especially with those generational differences, which we see a bit in this film as well. A lot of parents, a lot of families arrive from their home countries with a lot of those values still being very near and dear to their hearts. And then they have children, and then those values tend to clash, right? Because here in the U.S., the lifestyle, the values, the culture is vastly different to a lot of the ones that exist in Latin America. So we do get to see some of that generational tension in this film as well. I know there's a lot to talk about in this film, so I will stop right there.
No, but I like that you bring up the collectivist versus the individualist culture because, you know, for a lot of these immigrants who are coming over, they are coming from collectivist cultures who, as you mentioned, really value the group, the good of the group, the good of the family above all else. And America is a very individualist culture where it's, you know, you get yours, you think of number one always first. And so for these children of immigrants, they're sort of torn between these two cultures where they have kind of conflicting messages coming at them, so their family is very much put us first, really work for the good of the whole. But American culture is telling them, always look out for number one, get it while you can. And so I think one of many things that film touches on that I think is really great to see is that sort of that pull they feel in two different directions between the collectivist and the individualist culture. So I think that's really unique and special.
Yeah, there are a lot of us who exist in that tension, right? And I'm often very critical of higher ed and researchers because I find that a lot of us tend to be discuss very little, right? And we're such a big population in this country. We're one of the fastest growing groups in this country, right? The second generation immigrant, the first generation American of Latin American descent. And we often get ignored. We're often not part of the conversation. And we exist, as I mentioned, we exist in this tension, right? Where we have on this side the values that our parents raised us with, and on this side the values in the society in which we exist in which we know, right? Because this is all a lot of us know. And there's often that push and pull, right? Like, should I go with who my parents sort of raised me with? Should I go more with this? Where am I in this spectrum? And I hope we start talking more about this, because I think there's a beauty and there's a lot of positive in this, because we're able to exist here and we're able to exist here, right? And a lot of us talk about this as more of a binary. It's either this or this. You have to choose, right? But being able to go from side to side, I think there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because this is a tension that we see even, as college professors at CCP, and I'm sure many other colleges where children of immigrants attend, because these students who are, first generation, or, they came over, but they came over when they were very young, so they were heavily influenced by American culture, and they're torn between these two worlds. And so, their family will say to them, it's so important that you do these things. And the professors are saying, no, but you have to prioritize your studies first. And so it can seem like a real culture clash, I think, for a lot of these students, because on the one hand, they're being told, no, family first, and their professors and the colleges and other institutions with which they're involved, their employers or their educational institutions are saying, no, you have to prioritize us. So I thought it was a really, apt film to talk about, especially, for a show produced at a community college where we serve such a large immigrant community, both Latinx and other immigrant communities. And that was one of the reasons I really liked that you brought this one up.
Yeah, a lot of our students would identify with this. I identify with it, right? I was in that position as a student where I had to dedicate time to my studies and I had to dedicate time to my family business, right? Because it was expected of me to dedicate equal time to these things. I can't show more dedication to my education because then my family is going to be hurt that I'm not contributing to the family business that sort of has given me everything that I have. But then I can't give too much energy to that because then my studies would get affected. Again, that tension, that push and pull.
Yeah, it's a really unique struggle, and I think that's one of the things that the film touches on very nicely. Now, all the films that we've talked about have focused on very remarkable stories, oftentimes even extreme stories. But I really liked this last film because I think it tells a different immigrant story for Latinx people in America. And, well, the name of the film is Beatrice at Dinner. And tell us a little bit about it, and then we'll watch a clip and we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, this was one of your recommendations, actually. So I'm actually really glad that you suggested this, because this is a super interesting film. It has a lot of social commentary around immigration in the U.S. We see this pretty racist white guy, Doug, who is rich, has a lot of privilege in the world, right? He's very privileged. And he's the antagonist to Beatrice, who sort of guides us through this spiritual journey, calling out a lot of the crappy stuff and a lot of the things that are wrong here in the U.S. I love this film, and I'm so glad you brought it up.
Great. Well, let's watch a clip from it. It's a very short clip, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Well, when I first came to the United States a long time ago...
Did you come legally?
Yes.
Now, how'd that work?
I had family here on my mother's side. My grandmother died,
and they're all citizens, or
Doug, what, you work for the INS? You're grilling her.
I'm curious. A lot of people come here illegally. I was interested in how she did it.
Okay, just ignore him. So you came here, however, who cares? And then?
I found a job at a health food market. I didn't speak any English, so my job was just to clean and lay out the fresh food. But there was a pharmacist there, Dr. Shibari, and he taught me everything about alternative medicine, all the therapies, He was like a father to me, the father I wish I had.
So great to have a mentor.
Dr. Shibari was a wonderful man, very wise. He saved my life, I think, because I always had inside me the desire to be a healer.
Good for you. You're working. You're contributing.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. It's only a minute long, but I think there's a lot in here. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, that was quite the punch, right? I sort of felt triggered a little bit here and there when Doc was saying certain things, but I'm glad Beatrice held her own. There's so much social criticism in this film about the U.S. First, there's criticism about this crazy unhinged capitalism and Doug's business dealings, right? I think that's very clear. We also see, of course, the critique of white privilege. How Doug is this really privileged white guy who just walks around saying whatever comes to his mind and doesn't give a crap about anyone's feelings, right? And I would take it even a step further. And I think this is a conversation that we've had before when we talk about politics, Amy. It's also a critique on the gendered components of white privilege, right? Where a lot of the white women in the film are just sort of slapping Doug's hand or telling Doug to be quiet. And they're just carrying on with business, right? Not calling out the blatant racism that Doug is clearly spewing, right? It's also criticizing hunting and the ways in which we treat animals here in the U.S. So I really like this film because we don't often see undocumented immigrants being represented in that light. Beatrice is a healer and a masseuse in the film. However, she's more of an outsider, especially in that dinner table scene. She's more of an outsider who's sort of forcing us to reflect on what the U.S. truly is, right? She's sort of reminding us that, hey, it's not all fireworks on the 4th of July and Santa Claus on Christmas, right? There's a lot of things that are messed up in this country, and I think Beatrice, an immigrant, is showing us that these things exist, right? So she's sort of taking the outsider perspective and allowing us to sort of reflect on what we are as a country.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to look objectively at American culture, American views on immigration. And one of the things that this film teases out that I really appreciated was that, like, the nice racism. So, like, you don't have to be calling somebody a slur. You don't have to be making sort of salacious accusations against them to still be racist. And you can kind of see in this clip even when, his response is, oh, you're contributing though, so it's okay. And so this kind of, I'll give you the stamp of approval because you were doing the things I believe are okay to do. And at other points in the film, we see him, ask her, where are you from? No, but where are you from? And asking her, one of the first things he asks her is, are you here legally? And just this constant sort of grilling, but it's done in a way where I think if you're not really paying attention, you can think, well, he's just asking her, very reasonable questions. He has a right to ask her if she's legal, right? And it's this kind of way of thinking that I think a lot of Americans have slipped into, where it's this sort of almost like backdoor racism, where I'm not being racist. I didn't call you a name. What I did was I was just asking if you were legal because being illegal is bad, and kind of putting that onus on the immigrant. It's not my problem. I'm not racist. You're just potentially doing the wrong thing. But if you play by the rules that I believe you should play by, then I will accept you to a degree, but I will always also keep you at arm's length. And as you said, the white women are, on their face, very nice to her throughout the film. She's stuck at their house because her car isn't working. They allow her to stay. They allow her to eat with them. But there is sort of that, and we've spoken about this before, that white savior complex. I'm so giving, I'm so generous. Look, I let this person of color stay at my house. I let them eat with me. And there's a sort of almost a pride in being able to say she's a friend of the family. We don't treat her like she's a servant. And yet at the same time, she's never really truly part of the group. She's always kept at arm's length. She's always to the outside. And the women are always complicit. They may roll their eyes, they may give an uncomfortable smirk, but they never really call him out on the horrible things he's saying to her, and the other men are saying to her as well. So I think all of that is really interesting, because it's, I think racism has had to, there will always be blatant racists, of course, but I think racism has had to change, because some racists are figuring out, I can't say those things anymore. So how can I still hold these people to the fire without actually exposing myself?
How can I be a racist without, being an outward racist, right?
Yes.
This film was released in 2017. It was very timely. 6 months into the Trump administration, we get this film, right? And if we know anything about the 2016 election, it was driven by immigration, right? It was driven by immigration. That was part of Trump's core, right? His racist core, his anti-immigrant rhetoric, beliefs, and policies once he was in office. So I think this film was extremely timely, and I think it'll be worth for a lot of viewers to watch the film now, right? And sort of reflect on the 4 years of the Trump administration, because I think a lot of things will make more sense now that we've gone through so many different things in the Trump administration, right? The recent protests against racial injustice. I think a lot of viewers will understand this a whole lot better now than they would have in 2017.
Yes, I think it gives opportunities as well to reflect upon some of the narratives that were so quickly adopted around issues of racism. So even the border separation between the children and their parents. One of the common narratives that was spewed out really quickly to defend those actions was, well, it's the parents' fault for bringing them over in the first place. The parents are the ones who committed the crime, so you can't blame us for, dealing with people harshly who have committed a crime. And I think, the character Doug really sort of plays into that mentality where I'm not calling you a name, I'm just holding you accountable for the wrongs you may have done.
It's no irony that Doug and Donald are very, very familiar.
Yes. I think perhaps crafted in his image.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion, and I think it's covered a really wide range of immigration issues, both the ones that are, I think, very familiar to us, that come to mind immediately. So we think border crossings. Unfortunately, sometimes we think gangs. But I think also we delved into some of the broader issues. So, what happens once they're here? What are the struggles? What are the struggles that their children face? And how is the immigrant experience changing as the way we express our racism has also changed, and how our political climate has changed? So I really appreciate you coming here and, discussing this with us and really kind of digging into and unpacking these issues.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have here for today. So you have been watching Cinema Bytes on CCP TV, the Emmy Award-winning educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye out for the next big film debate. See you next time.